We just got done recording the Julia Spillman episode, and it was really fun. She's quite plugged into all the major luxury markets and claims to be the first team to hit $1 billion about 10 years ago. There's a lot of claims out there, although I would say that their social media accounts support that they've seen a lot of success very quickly and early. We also talk about specifically imposter syndrome and how someone from a small town in Kentucky can make it to the high rises in New York, LA, and Miami. Check it out. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey, and we are officially, as you know, top 5% of global podcasts, not just within real estate, but especially within real estate. And it's because of guests like Julia Spillman. Julia comes from New York, LA, and Miami, all the hot spots of high society. She is a part of the first team to break $1 billion in sales, the Douglas Elliman real estate team. She is the CEO of Eklund Gomes team and the #1 mega team nationwide. Welcome to the show, Julia.
Hey guys. And most importantly, don't forget hailing from the great state of Kentucky.
That's right. Yeah, you come from very humble beginnings, a small town in Kentucky that doesn't even have a stoplight. What's the name of that small town?
It's Livermore, Kentucky. I used to say, and I guess I need to correct myself. I was speaking on a women's series this week, and I said that not even our whole county has a stoplight, but I just was notified we now have our first stoplight.
You're putting it on the map.
County. Yeah.
They heard about you and they're like, hey, we got to get a stoplight on.
Not in my town yet. So it's still wish list items. So we just broke, I think, 1,000 people in our little town. So
that's amazing. Yep. We have a town up north. We have a little shack on a lake, and it's North Webster, and they have not broken 1,000 people yet. So I know exactly the kind of setting that you're talking about here in Indiana. Julia, you have a very fascinating story, not just from the humble beginnings of Kentucky, but you found yourself at Merrill Lynch during the crash in '08 before you got on the real estate side. So I want to talk about that, and I do want to talk about this idea of high society. If we hop on your Instagram, it's a very lavish lifestyle, luxury, and we were talking about luxury in the pre-show. And I'm just curious, what do people not see that's behind the scenes of luxury?
Oh my gosh, we always say, because of course I've been so fortunate to partner with Frederick Eklund and John Gomes, the original reality show brokers. And I always say, like, as fascinating as the show, John was selling New York, and then Frederick, of course, I think we were talking about it the other day, I think he did like 135 episodes of $1 Million Listing between New York and LA. And the most interesting pieces of all of this would have been behind the scenes, because I think, like, I always say, like, that's probably a little bit of the unfortunate part, is everybody just sees what the press and the cameras and Instagram want everybody to see. And I think the disservice, especially to the industry, is really seeing behind the scenes. And, if people could really spend more time in our offices with us, watching us, one, from my Instagram, it looks like I'm always in hair and makeup. And of course, I probably look somewhat the same this morning, but my 90-person team gets to see me come in from red-eye flights, going from one market to the next, coming straight in the office from, landing at 7 a.m. with, a bun here, no makeup on, and something I slept on in the plane. So I think a lot of the, I think it's kind of like a disservice to younger agents in the business who think that, I think it's Beyonce, I woke up like this. It's definitely not how I woke up. And it's more like waking up at 5 a.m, trying to get a workout in, trying to beat, the team, especially Frederick, from jumping on texts and emails, and somehow getting the day started in what we try to really run our business in a proactive versus a reactive way.
Okay, so let me ask you something. It seems like, though, it's not always sunshine and rainbows on the luxury side and glamorous with the dresses and the cameras.
Yeah.
You mentioning the other side, it feels like You like that as well, though. It feels like you enjoy the getting up early, the working out, the flights. I mean, maybe not the flights. I don't know. You tell me. Like, do you do it because you enjoy one side of it, or do you love all of it?
I always say, like, because I am a girl from a really small town, I kind of like having a mix of everything. I believe that part of the reason that we did the expansion. So John and Fred are celebrating 20 years together this year. This is my 20th year in the business, of course, starting on the finance side of real estate with HSBC and then ultimately Merrill Lynch. So I think for us, we also wanted to really mix it up. Selling condos in New York City, of course, is most people's dream, and it really was our dream and still is. But having the ability to see what the other markets are doing, to experience selling single family homes in Miami, in LA, in addition to beautiful condos, to work on, land deals, to work on development. We also needed to really mix it up. So the expansion plan was very personal as well as a professional decision. Frederick at the time really wanted to spend more time personally with the family in LA and ultimately move there to run the expansion. I'm, of course, here in Miami. I've been in and out of this market, for over a decade. So it really was a way for us, everybody wants to talk about work-life balance, but let's just be honest, in this business, that's very difficult to say. And it's very difficult to service clients by saying, oh, I'm going to turn my phone off after 5 or 6, or quite frankly, even after 9. And I think the only way to have a work-life balance is what I call blurred lines. So maybe you're flying to LA for work, but you also build in personal time. You build in the ability to spend time with friends there. You ultimately fly to Cabo for a long weekend from there. I think you've got to be realistic with the industry and the standards of this industry for customer service, and then work a plan based upon that. So we built this huge juggernaut of a business across the US, but also found a way to make sure that we're personally really enjoying it.
Well, you guys have done a phenomenal job. Obviously, if you check the press, it's the numbers are there, and the team looks happy and excited. What I think is interesting is this whole concept of imposter syndrome. And I didn't tell you I was going to talk about this, but when you told me your humble beginnings, I thought it'd be interesting to see if you've ever experienced that or what your thoughts are on imposter syndrome. Everyone's talking about it. Last 5 episodes is following me everywhere. I've got my own thoughts, but what do you think about imposter syndrome?
I mean, if you're not, buying into like fake it till you make it, then like, have you even been able to make it? I don't think very rarely does anybody start out on third base. I think, again, I am a great example of, when I kind of came out in my first Real Deal story that we did, I believe that was probably 2017, 2018, where they called me the mastermind behind the expansion. Well, at that point, I'd been in the business for a pretty decent amount of time. And so it was almost like, the overnight success story, 10 years in the making. And I think that's what people forget. And as you and I were chatting about before we started this, there's so much behind the scenes that people don't know. And then I always say one of the biggest disservices is when people only know this version of me as the CEO, as leading the expansion, as running a 90-person, number one mega team. But again, you go back, like my whole story starts with humble beginnings. It starts with, a girl who grew up in a hometown with no stoplight. It's a girl who grew up in the South, where obviously having this huge dream of going to the big city and being a businesswoman wasn't something that was really, being talked about with all of my girlfriends, and ultimately, kind of built into my education and upbringing. So I think you have to buy into the future vision. So I don't think it's faking at any point. I think it's finding a way to, one of the great things I love about teams is maybe you have the connections, maybe you have the doors that can be open for you, but if you don't have the experience, you ultimately can't close the client. So if you even look at the team concept with junior agents, it's all built on a little bit of like faking it till you make it.
Yeah.
But it's not done in any type of disloyal or, kind of scammy way. It's, hey, I've got these contacts. I can't close them, but I'm going to be bringing in a senior agent with more experience to really pair together. So if done correctly, I think it's one of the most, honestly, it's one of the most important kind of like starting pads, because no one's going to walk in the door, even if they have an impressive resume before being in real estate, and be able to know everything. So there is a little bit of, and again, I hate using the word fake. I need to come up with like, what that ultimately is. But, I think it's,
well, yeah, because you can be real about it. Like if you're on the rise, if you're technically not good at the thing yet, but you're on a team that's good at it and you have the contacts and you're bringing someone in, it's not fake at all. You're actually embracing that and letting them know. I mean, how you say that is crafty. I mean, you don't say, I'm not good at this, I'm going to bring in someone in who is. What was the step? What was the step that got you from the small town girl in Kentucky to, I think the first, I mean, maybe there was something between that and Merrill Lynch, but what took you to Merrill Lynch?
Just plugging myself back in, us brokers always needing to charge. So I started my internship at HSBC in college. So went to Western Kentucky, really wanted to get, of course, I think a lot of us started out in kind of more like the mortgage finance side, and obviously working on that side, I think really I have found, at least with our shop, people who have a finance or kind of like banking mortgage side, like really understand the transactions. And I think that gives someone that's kind of starting in the business like a jump off spot. So for me, especially working at Merrill Lynch and dealing with like very high network clients, I really understood the developer side of it. So really understanding, debt, really understanding financing, understanding all the really important pieces. And I think that, again, you have to have some type of foundation. And I think, again, the most successful agents, now, again, we're getting really lucky because we've got a lot of people coming out of college now for the first time being like, I want to do this as a profession and I can make a lot of money and I can have a really amazing career. But most of the top agents right now, like we had a prior career, and a lot of our shop is banking. You see a lot of people that were very successful on the team that have really strong marketing backgrounds. So I think all of us came from somewhere and tried to figure out, okay, how do we take this in a little bit of like fake it till you make it? But, let's go like even further in the sense of when I first came to Douglas Elliman, and I think, what day is it? It's the 7th day. So this week will be my 14th year at Douglas Elliman. And again, I came from HSBC, Merrill Lynch. I had a pretty nice resume, but started out on a team. And like everybody else, I think the most important thing is to start at the bottom. If you don't understand every piece of it, you actually can't be the best agent and you can't service the client thoroughly. And I don't care if you're staying in $1,000 rentals and $500,000 sales, or if you're ultimately doing $100,000 a month rentals and $100 million plus. Everybody has to start at the bottom. And I think it's a huge disservice if you try to kind of, again, not do rentals because the amount of, really what you're learning in the business from them.
Well, you told me in the pre-show that you just had, I think, a record-breaking sale, 115 million. Was that this year?
Yeah.
But that was a lead from an agent who deals primarily in rentals, right? Or apartments. Tell me that story.
So Kent Wu, one of my favorite agents. So he and I, back before I was the CEO of Eklund Gomes, my first project with John and Fred was running sales at One Seaport. Kent Wu and I did a ton of deals there. He was like known for doing mass volume of really probably, 1 to 4 million. And then also doing huge amount of rentals. So we always, once I came over on the other side, was really running it with John and Fred, Kent was always on our list to recruit, but we never could get him over because he always had so many new development deals closing out in a year, closing out in 2 years. So we called him, one day and was just like, okay, at some point we're going to make this happen. And probably 3-4 months after that call, he called me back and he said, hey, I'm closing out a bunch of my stuff. I think I might have an interesting lead I need you guys for. And I said, of course, I'm always here. What can we help you with? And he said, I just want to preface it with, this is a lead from a rental deal. it's $100 million plus, it could be completely legit and one of the biggest deals in New York City, or it could be completely, not. And, I'm the biggest believer of why not give it a shot? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And we had just closed out a deal at Central Park Tower probably a couple of weeks before that. So we said, okay, now's the time, let's do this. And ultimately it ended up closing at 115 million. But Kent's the type of agent that I love. If it's a deal, he's going to run with it. And I think more agents should have that mentality.
Because it leads to other things.
Yeah. Because they always want to assign a commission to it. But the funny thing is, if Kent had assigned a commission to deals like that, he would have just said, hey, maybe I'll make $2,000 off of this rental. Never would he think that he was going to do a $115 million deal. So I think it's a disservice to the future of the business if you think of a transaction as anything as a deal is a deal. And you never know what that deal is ultimately going to be. Ray and Lisa, they've been on our team for 10, I believe this year is 10 years. And I remember one of my first days when I joined Eklund Gomes, and somebody called into the office and they said, we're looking to talk to an agent. We're probably selling our company. They use all the words that would I probably wouldn't have took these. We're probably selling our company. We live somewhere in the Midwest and we love New York City. And we want someone to show us around the city next weekend. Yeah. And Ray and Lisa, being the agents they are, said, we got them. We'll grab them. And they took them out. They saw a bunch of properties around, I believe it was 10, 15 million. And I remember they're coming back and I almost was kind of like laughing. I was like, how did that go, guys? And they were like, oh, they're super nice people. They've got a great company. They're talking about selling it. And they didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And then a couple of months went by and the client called back and said, hey, I think we're getting closer to selling, but it's going to be for a higher price. Can you send us some stuff around 20 million? So I'm like, okay, guys, like we're still chasing this around. Sent the people over. They ultimately sold their company and bought, I think, a $23 million place with Ray and Lisa. Wow. So they're such a wonderful example of, I would have said that deal was going to be nothing, that they were just going to take, a really nice couple from the Midwest out and show them some beautiful properties in New York City. And that would be how the story ended.
You know what's interesting is just waking up and doing the work and being and having faith that if you start focusing on being in the right rooms, that success will find you. Because the $115 million listing, that person, I don't know what it was worth when they bought it, or I don't know the backstory, but they had it most likely an agent before. And so when you have those relationships, you think, well, there's no way I'm going to crack into that. Like, I'm not going to win this listing over whoever sold it before. And so you have these limiting beliefs around the people that you're calling or the calls that you take in. And I love your co-agent on that, because he's just like, I'm going to go where the deals are and I'm going to trust that they're going to lead me to more deals regardless of the size. And I'm going to service everybody. And that's a great attitude to have.
Well, I think, again, going back to like the fake it till you make it, I remember early on we were, I was on a prior team when I first started Douglas Elliman, like I said, 14 years ago this week. And I remember this one girl ultimately left the team I was originally on. And she was like, I want to do higher price points and I want to do more luxury listings. And I kind of made a joke and I was like, okay, so how do you do that? Do you just like send out a mailer and say like, congratulations, guys, I'm now doing higher price points than I usually do. And we always like joke about that, because that's why the team model is so great. Because if your average price point is 2 million, and let's say you've sold every $2 million property or every $2 million building in, trying to think what's even 2 million anymore in New York, but like in the financial district, how do you break out of being known as the girl or the guy who's your go-to for that size unit? Mm-hmm. And I think, again, why the team model is so great is if you co-list or pair up with someone who's working on higher price points and assist them in it and get on the listing, then all of a sudden you have experience in a 4 million, a 5 million, a 6 million.
Yeah.
Because it only takes one. Mm-hmm. And once you can say, oh, of course, I just sold this listing at, the Chelsea Mercantile for $6 million. Of course, I could do your $6 million listing. But agents sometimes don't realize the true value that team mentality has, because
Sure.
if you are, again, faking it till you make it, you have to find some way. What is that vehicle to do it in an authentic, and of course, making sure you're actually really servicing the client and have the ability to service? Because, if you only are doing rentals, how do you switch over to the sales side? And that's why, again, I'm
Hmm.
so pro team for the industry,
Well,
because
that's
that
part of it,
is the
though.
experience.
That's part of faking it till you make it.
Mhm.
I mean, we're going to keep on using that buzzword, but that's part
Yeah.
of having like your clients having trust in you, is the
Yep.
trust that when you don't have an answer, you've hit a wall, that you will find it and find people to help
Mhm.
you. I think as a client, I would want that.
Yep.
I would want
Absolutely.
my agents to be that resourceful. Let's talk about image for a second. I've been on your Instagram, like I said in the beginning, just very lavish lifestyle, all the lights, cameras, action kind of Instagram profile. How much does image play into when you're recruiting? Because when people are coming to you, you're a leader, right? So you're attracting people like you and people that want to be like you. How much does image matter when you're coaching your agents on this brand that really prides itself in good image?
Well, I think it's twofold. Again, kind of talking about, me as like a small town girl. I think it's the importance of, not becoming too jaded in it as well. I think that, one of the things that was really, really difficult for me, that I have to, give a big shout out to, especially Frederick, on, I didn't love, especially as a woman, and, at the time, a pretty young woman getting into the business, I didn't love being vulnerable. So for me, I wanted, hair and makeup and gorgeous outfits. And this, again, as we're kind of selling luxury to like feel and look luxury. But I realized as a leader in the industry, and as I got a little older and more experienced in things, I was also doing a bit of like a disservice to like the younger girls, or especially the younger girls in the industry, thinking that, again, I wake up like this. I definitely do not. And I think it was like, how do you become authentic and real, but still we are selling to a very high end client. And like you said, we are selling luxury. And I think it's all about balance. Everything is about balance. And if you meet me in person, you see, now, unfortunately, I've been dealing with a bit of a voice issue because I have been talking way too much. But I'm pretty Southern. I'm, at least I think I'm pretty sweet. And I think it's about having that balance of like looking luxury, but also being like very approachable and very authentic. So something I came and spoke, a lot about during COVID is, unfortunately, I had some pretty serious health issues that I dealt with as we were really rolling into the expansion. And I thought that I needed to hide those,
Right.
because if people thought that I was battling this, how would it almost like interfere with what I was doing work wise? Or God forbid, as a Southern girl, like I would never want someone to like, quote unquote, feel sorry for me. But I realized as I became a little more forthcoming with it, it was also a way for people to see me as much more of a real person instead of this kind of like Instagram persona or person, or sometimes too, even it's a little intimidating to see these pictures of like me between Frederick and John, and me at the front of like 100-person team. And I always say, like, as we were kind of talking about before, I wish we could have like all the outtakes of life. And if people only saw kind of, especially like the early photos where I'm definitely not nervous at work, and I feel like I'm fantastic at my job, but I get super nervous about these photos. And,
Mm.
the team like loves to tease me because that's just not naturally who I am.
Do you
But I
ever
think
post those old photos? Do you ever post those old posts and say this is where I came from and get vulnerable like that?
I came out a lot more with like, again, like the health stuff, and, I'll have little like snippets of kind of like stuff from Kentucky. I
Hmm.
actually haven't been posting as much in the grid, but more like story stuff, and obviously kind of reposting the team. But I try to be, especially on like podcasts and panels, really talk pretty openly about, a bit of like the challenges, in my head. And I think all of us, of kind of still being nervous and still being, for me now, a woman in my 40s having to be a bit of these photos, kind of the center of attention, like that's not an easy space. I think the job's easy. I think the job's intense, but I think the work for me comes very natural. But the branding and the marketing, especially of me as the woman, as the CEO, that's the pressure point for me. And I think if you look at my Instagram, it's very easy and natural, and that couldn't be the furthest from the truth. I remember one of our favorite photos, and I have this beautiful gown on. One, I don't own any of these gowns. They're all, loaners or rentals. So I think people think that if you looked in my closet, and have all these crazy pieces, I would never spend my money that way. I think there's much smarter ways to be savvy with that stuff. But I remember in between the photos, the dress was so tight and I was so uncomfortable in it that in between the photos, my hairstylist would have to unzip it so I could actually breathe. And I always laugh when I see that photo because it is, to me, and it has these great shoulder pads. So it really, to me, signifies like the strength of a woman and the industry that it's allowed me to be, so great in it. But it doesn't represent the vulnerabilities and what's really going on. And
it's so funny because I think everyone can resonate with that, whether to scale, right? Because like even if you think about a pair of shoes that you like that look cool but don't feel nice, it's like, okay,
girls know that too well.
how much do I care about how I look in this moment versus how the comfort? And man, the older I get, and I think it's my kids have a nice way of humbling me, regardless to scale of luxury and to scale of luxury lifestyle. I feel like kids do a good job of not caring who you are to the rest of the world. You're just dad or mom. I am curious. Okay, but before we run out of time, I just want to real short, just tell me what you feel like being a part of Merrill Lynch during the crash of '08, because I think you were in Miami at the time, right? And we're watching.
No, I was actually in Tampa.
Oh, you're okay. Florida, so you're in Tampa at the time, but Lehman Brothers are shutting down. If you watch The Big Short, you can relive the whole thing again. People are crying. People are crying in the streets. You talk about it with this ease of, I don't know, just not panic, but I'm sure it was back then. What was this scenario like? And did it prepare you to kind of be careful with your real estate experience, knowing what could happen?
I mean, again, I think one of the biggest, probably, pros I have is coming from a really, really small town. So not being around the type of wealth that really is my day to day. Now, again, we had incredibly wealthy people in Kentucky, but it wasn't flaunted and it wasn't demonstrated the way that it is in the markets that I live and, and obviously practice in. And I think also coming from those humble beginnings gives you a lot more grounding. So, people find that it's pretty hard to get me frazzled. And that's very much like by design. And I think in every lesson, in everything, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So I was also so young at the time that you almost didn't really truly understand. I think, being at Merrill, we were almost like more, especially, on like the mortgage, like finance side, we were more like offended that Bank of America was coming in because Merrill Lynch was, and again, from a girl from the middle of nowhere in Kentucky, Merrill was this like, very like conservative, stable, like amazing place where I was like so incredibly, proud to work. That exactly, it very much represented kind of who I was and, my upbringings and what I really wanted to be. So the thought of like Bank of America, because at the time is, in the banking world, we kind of thought of them more as like bank tellers versus like private bankers. Like we were so almost like offended culture wise that, they were going to kind of come over and like be the boss of Merrill Lynch. And, again, I think they did an amazing job with kind of like the marriage of all of that. But I think for me, it was kind of like a wake up call in the sense of I really wanted to be on the other side. And as much as I loved working there, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, especially while you were interacting with real estate agents who I thought had the most fun. It was like, well, wait a second. They're driving around in their convertibles with really cool clients, again, mutual clients of ours, but are really cool clients looking with interior designers. And I always like thought it as I saw the appraisals in black and white, and they saw the whole transaction in full color and almost probably 3D. And I was very jealous of that. And, as we all know, and I think this is a huge opportunity zone, 14 years ago when I started in the business, it wasn't the most educated, savvy career. And it very much, like we were talking earlier, it very much is now. We have a lot of Ivy League agents who are making this a career now, coming straight out of college. But it was kind of like, well, wait a second, we're the polished, educated ones, but they're making more money and they're having more fun. So to me, when I moved to New York, I guess about 14 and a half years ago, I wanted to switch to the other side. It was like, okay, wait a second. Even if I just have a little fun with them for a while, and obviously,
and you're still there.
Yeah, here
celebrating
we are, so
14 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, it's if you hop on your journey, it's not you don't have to go too far to see like the whole progression of Kentucky, Merrill Lynch, flying around from place to place to where you are now, and it's very cool to watch. You're to end the show, you are very pro women. You feel like your upbringing in the business wasn't exactly the way you would want it to be, so you've made sure that you have provided that for everyone, but especially the women around you. Do you want to, for 1 minute to end the show, kind of share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really empowering women in this business. I talk very openly how I think being a woman in the business is actually the hugest advantage. Especially working with developers and high network clients. I think women have a way where we can say things that maybe, just to be blunt, that a straight male would not be able to say to a straight male billionaire. Where I think we have the ability to, we're all the queens of multitasking, which is incredibly, incredibly important in this business. But I think we have a real skill set that really resonates with buyers, sellers, and definitely with developers, that us as women should never think that we're at a disadvantage, that at, being in this moment in time, it's definitely an advantage. I think one of the things that my dad did an amazing, amazing job as is he always said to me, you can do everything that I do as a businessman, and you can do everything that your mom does as a beautiful, homemaker. And I really, really leaned into that. And I really try to empower the amazing women that I have in my shop. My CMO is a woman, my COO is a woman. We really try to empower women and let them know, like, we really are the best. And, this is an industry where you can incredibly, incredibly thrive at being a woman.
I love it. Just to remind you, if you're listening to this, what I want you to do is think of one person, only one, that you can send this episode to that you want to impact their day. Julia, thanks for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you. Nice spending the morning with you.
All right. We'll see you next time.